So tonight's decision-making drills and training with the armed security members of this large church in the West Michigan area went just awesomely well tonight. This was the second set that we trained for this church for a total of about 25 people or so. And it was a real eye-opener for them. A lot of these guys, good people, civilians with their CPL carriers, they go to the range with this church team maybe once or twice a month, and they fire hundreds and hundreds of rounds. And this was the first time, though, that they had an opportunity to put everything that they've learned in all their training, first aid, stuff like that. They put it all together in a situation where they had to basically know how to shoot, move, and communicate. And again, not only individually, but to work together as a team in a high-stress situation. And Roy here is one of my instructor role players with an extensive background with weapons training and so on. And we had an opportunity here where we can just sit down and discuss how tonight's training went. His scenario tonight for this church group was specifically an individual who's loitering around the nursery daycare area, and the staff gets upset or concerned, and they call the church security, and they come and address him. And of course, to mix things up, not every scenario with every group that went through was a lethal force encounter, just to keep everyone on their toes and not to condition people, civilians who aren't used to this type of training. I don't want to condition them to always potentially resort to lethal force in a high-stress situation. So Roy, tell us a little bit about the scenario tonight, how it went with this particular group, and then also last week's group. Because again, tonight was the second group that we had with this particular church.
What I appreciated most about the both trainings was the enthusiasm of both groups.
Yeah,
it's like, man, these guys wanted to learn. They were sponges. Mm-hmm. The second thing is they've both been through your general response training, mm-hmm. and with that general response training, I think that dialed them in a little bit for this not so general response with possibility of deadly force. Mm-hmm. Becoming involved. And so rather than see a gun or see a knife or whatever and get all amped up, they were able to maintain that level of calm, mm-hmm. which I think helped my scenario especially, because I went from knife, one was just a phone, one was a gun. They were all very dynamic, and the guys would ask me, what could we do different? And it's like, hey guys, it's so dynamic. You're going to have to figure these things out. We're giving you a basis of what you can do, and you now know that you have to think these things through. Mm-hmm. And they did a great job of doing that. Some just needed a little bit of tweaking on use of space, maybe putting obstacles between them and an aggressor, that maybe had a knife or something. Get something between, use of space. Possibly not getting themselves in a crossfire, and now they know they have to think of these things. Mm-hmm. And this is mm-hmm. What they came away with. But their enthusiasm and their ability to maintain that calm demeanor, mm-hmm. I think, shows to the training that they got originally, and now it's carrying over into our shooting, mm-hmm. non-shooting scenarios.
And it actually is scientifically proven that you're going to get out of training what you put into it. You go into training with an attitude or something and don't put in even 50%, you're just going to not get as much out of it as you can, and it will bite you in the butt. Saw it in the military, saw it in the police department. If you go into a training environment with a bad attitude and all that, you're just not going to be all that you can be. I definitely saw some people go into a minor vapor lock. Obviously, again, this was the first time they had it. They were put in a situation, even though it was simulated, in a situation where they might have to suddenly resort to lethal force. And there was a few moments where some guys definitely had that deer in the headlight look where, right. Okay, now what? And I had to coax them along, because some of the objectives that I had tonight was to train and get these guys to start thinking outside the box. Once the shooting's done, now what? Are we just going to stand there with our finger up our butt? No, there's things that needs to be done. We might have to render first aid for other people who might be injured. We need to get on the phone to actually call the police and EMS. Someone might need to get on the radio to call for other church staff to come help them. I mean, there's a lot of things that need to go on, and they definitely had information overload, I think.
Right.
There was a couple groups that I mean, they were able to chug along just fine, but you could tell this is the first time being put in the situation, you could see there's like, and you can talk about it and think about it, but until you're in that position to kind of walk through it, it can be a shock to the system.
Yeah.
And we saw that.
In that fight, flight, freeze, submit posture section, that freeze portion that you're just talking about, the deer in the headlights, through this type of training, stress inoculation, they might freeze. They might be there for 8 seconds while their brain is trying to figure out what to do. But as they continue to train like this, that freeze portion, that when we stress inoculate them, that's going to start to shorten that, and they're going to be able to function better. That's going to lower that response time, and they're going to, every time they do it, it's going to be better.
And that's one of the things I really emphasize about training, the dynamic, realistic scenario training with gentle response, and now the decision-making drills. You can read all the how-to books and watch all the how-to videos, but until you actually walk through it, have scenario training, you're not going to develop that stress inoculation. You're not going to develop muscle memory. You're not going to develop that sense of confidence not only in yourself but of your teammates, and you're also not going to get that real-time feedback like you get from guys like you and the other instructors who give them real-time feedback as to what they did right, because we always want to emphasize what they did right, but also what they could probably tweak if that bad day ever comes and they actually have to have some type of shooting or something in their life. And one other thing I emphasize with the folks, in the 20 years I was a police officer, I only almost used my gun once. I'm not saying I didn't have it out many, many times, clearing basements, cars, and things like that. But in terms of being in a situation where I was convinced I was about to shoot somebody, that happened only once in the late 90s. The vast majority of CPL holders and stuff like that will probably never, ever in their lifetime encounter a situation like that. And we hope they never do. But for guys who volunteer to be church security and all that, we see every now and then a church is involved in some type of mass shooting or some type of incident. And this is a good way to get prepared. Not only just raise your hand and volunteer to be security, but actually train and simulate some of these situations and actually work through it. Just like people going through fire drills, they actually get up and walk out the classroom, and they actually develop that muscle memory. So, any closing thoughts?
I would say with the training tonight, everyone got an adrenaline dump.
I think so. Yeah.
And with that being said, that's the start of that stress inoculation that we talk about, and being able to control that adrenaline dump through all the things that we talked about in the class. I think they did a great job, and if they keep training, it's just going to get better. Yeah, phenomenal group. So, it is what it is. Decision-making drills. There's a lot of folks out there who are CPL carriers, and they train, and they train as in they go to the range, or a square range, and they shoot and they shoot and they shoot. I even saw tonight some groups when they drew their weapons and all that, and they simulated a shooting. They actually did not get off the X. They locked in place. And one of the things we want to emphasize to people, if the shooting starts, start moving, get off the X, seek cover. So it was interesting to see that phenomena actually take place, even in a simulated situation. So decision-making drills, you owe it to yourself and your teammates and your church or any organization that if you're an armed security guard and all that, if you're not familiar with this type of training, scenario-based, dynamic, realistic, based on realistic scenarios that you could potentially face. Obviously, scenarios that I do with churches would be different from scenarios I do with like maybe a health services organization or whatever, or another corporation. All the scenarios are different, but very dynamic, very realistic. So if you carry a weapon and you are only going to the range and shooting hundreds of rounds a month, that's great, but you're only half-stepping it, and you need to do some realistic dynamic scenario training. So, on that note, I hope to see you at our next training seminar. We're going to have a blast.